Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Synergies Tier List video. Today our analysts will be ranking each synergy from S down to C tier for patch 1023. We'll go ahead and say that the meta really hasn't changed much in the last few patches. That means that not a lot of synergies have moved from our last trait tier list. That said, there are a few surprises of the patch that have risen up in value. Let's get to it. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video, and to start it off, we have the S tier synergies. This consists of Enlightened, Assassin, Adept, and Mystic. These are the best of the best when it comes to the current meta, and are some of the most consistent when it comes to earning a top 3. Up first, we have Enlightened. This really shouldn't come as much of a surprise considering how good Talon is, or should we say, still is. Despite getting a hotfix shortly after 1023 released, Talon is still the top dog when it comes to late game carries. Of course, he's not unbeatable, neither is Enlightened, but Talon is the most consistent carry. If you played 20 games of Talon Enlightened, the chances are you'll get a top 4 in a majority of those games. Now, we're really hyping up Talon, but the other Enlightened champions are great as well. Aurelia is key for Adept, Morgana provides decent AoE as well as Dazzler, and Janna can hard carry the early stages of the game. And even Nami has a place in the meta if you're playing a Luden's Echo Nami composition. Enlightened is easily the best synergy currently. Next, we have Assassin. Assassin really goes hand in hand with Enlightened. Talon, being an assassin, is naturally going to boost up the viability of this synergy on his own since he's one of the most played carries. So yes, the majority of the time when you see Assassin being used, it's with a Talon, but there are other compositions that utilize it as well, such as Moonlight Diana, or very rarely, Ninja Assassin. Adept is still the best splash trait in the game due to the frontline value of Shen and Aurelia, plus the late game strength of Yone. Of course, the synergy itself is also quite good, as the team-wide attack speed slow debuff is insanely useful. But the fact that you can get such a powerful effect for just 2 champions, especially 2 that can be used as your frontline, really elevates Adept in the meta. And our last S tier synergy is, of course, Mystic. At this point, just assume Mystic will always have their place in this tier unless they reduce the amount of magic damage in the game. Even though the current meta has quite a bit of physical damage between Talon, Hunter, and Sharpshooters, you still can get a lot of value from additional magic resist because the majority of the champions and abilities in set 4 do magic damage. Let's move on now to the A tier synergies. This tier consists of Dusk, Hunter, Sharpshooter, Dazzler, Cultist, Exile, Brawler, and Fortune. These synergies are above average when compared to the traits in B and C tier and have a strong place in the current meta. Up first is Dusk. Dusk isn't necessarily better than Hunter or Sharpshooter, but it is more versatile than those 2 traits. For one, it's less contested, so you'll have an easier time hitting Riven and Cassiopeia too. Second, it's not as reliant on extra traits to do well, so you're not fighting for things like Shen and Adept. And it's decent against Talon, whereas the other 2 synergies are much weaker into him. Since we've mentioned it already, let's talk about Hunter. Hunter is basically just Ashe the carry. Give her some buddies like Kindred or Warwick, and fill in the rest of the comp with whatever you want, and you're good to go. Hunter is simple to run, which makes it a great synergy to default to, especially since it's quite strong during stage 3 and 4. Of course, it does have a downside to it, and that's being weak into Talon, but hey, you can always play around that with things like Guardian Angel on your Ashe or ZZ Rot Portal to pull the assassins away from your backline. Similar to Hunter, we have Sharpshooter. Sharpshooters have risen again due to the nerfs that both Ashe and Hunter received. This is because Hunter was a decent counter to Sharpshooters, as the Hunter bonus damage would often burn through the Sharpshooter frontline too quickly for the Sharpshooters to pop off in fights. So with that matchup slightly more even, it means Sharpshooters are a viable option. But as with Hunter, they struggle against Talon. In fact, they probably have the hardest time dealing with Talon, which is why they are 3rd in A tier below Dusk and Hunter. Dazzler is a solid splash trait because it's relatively easy to fit into a lot of builds. Morgana for Enlightened, Lux is a mid-game powerhouse, and late game you have Ezreal. It's a solid and usually necessary synergy to add in to a lot of meta compositions. Cultist is the surprise of 1023, as players have really shown how powerful 6 Cultists can be during stage 3 and 4. With a strong Cultist board, you can almost skip the standard roll down at level 7 and look for a quicker level 8 or even level 9. That said, it can struggle with consistency early on in the game without a Chosen, or late game even with 9 Cultists. But being overall good throughout the game makes it an above average trait, to say the least. Exile covers your early game with Yasuo and the late game with Yone. Yone is also an Adept, making him highly valuable late game. It's not a flashy trait by any means, but it is overall solid for what it does. Brawler is in an odd spot for the meta. It has a place with Ash Hunter, and early on it can be decent, but it doesn't provide much beyond that. Most frontline traits struggle right now as they get bursted down too easily by things like Hunter, or assassins just jump past them. But of the frontline synergies, Brawler is probably the most consistent due to the extra health. Another surprise trait for A tier is Fortune. While we all consider Fortune to be a bit of a gamble when you're playing to lose with it, the fact is the average golds you gain from just winning with 3 or 6 Fortune is quite a lot. That means if you can high roll it early game, you're just naturally going to have an advantage. Of course, it is a synergy with inherent risk to it, but it can absolutely turn a game around if you can earn the payout. All right, now we move on to the B tier. This consists of Elderwood, Moonlight, Duelist, Keeper, Tormented, Divine, The Boss, and Vanguard. These are average synergies that can do well, but require the right situation to truly shine. First, we have Elderwood. Elderwood is worth playing mainly because of Ashe, but also Ezreal. Both are top tier champions in the meta, which adds a lot of value to Elderwood as a whole. But Elderwood does come at a price against Talon, since Talon targets the champion with the lowest armor, and since Elderwood is providing extra armor, it can lead to some of your squishier valuable units getting killed too early on in a fight. That said, if you can play around the Talon well enough, this can be a solid synergy to use to bolster your Ashe and Ezreal. Okay, so Moonlight may seem like it deserves a higher spot on the list since Diana is a pretty good carry when you can 4-star her, but that's precisely the issue. Diana is only viable as a carry for Moonlight, and you have to 4-star her. That is not an easy task to do consistently, especially since you need a Moonlight Chosen. So yes, Moonlight can do well in the meta, but the lack of consistency really hurts it. Duelist is in a similar position as Moonlight. It doesn't quite hit the same late game highs that Moonlight Diana does, but it can top 4 if you high roll during the mid game. The issue is just hitting that Yasuo Chosen and 3-starring him, which makes it a less than consistent synergy. But it does have a really good early game, so it is definitely viable to play in the current meta. Keeper is still trudging along as a primarily early game synergy, even though they attempted to buff it for the mid and late game. Unfortunately, the power spike of 6 Keeper is just a bit too hard to get, so until that's addressed, it's unlikely that this trait will do well past the early stage 4. Tormented, or Kayn, is back as a viable late game option. He's still not perfect and can drop his ultimate at bad times, but he's still a good source of late game damage if you can 2-star him and get the blue Tormented buff to beef up his damage. Divine, unfortunately, is still struggling to find its place in the meta. The buffs helped and have made it a solid choice early game and part of the mid game, but Warwick just lacks late game consistency as a carry. There are ways to play this synergy in the mid game, but it will feel lackluster the longer the game goes on. You'd think with Brawlers being an A tier that the boss would be higher up, but Set just struggles to do enough late game. If it was easier to 2-star him and get him onto your board earlier, then yes, he'd be amazing. Since that rarely happens early enough in the game, well, he's just going to be an okay 5-cost champion to throw in your composition if you're running Brawlers late game. And the last synergy for B tier is Vanguard. Let's go ahead and say that Sejuani, Thresh, and Aatrox are all really good champions. The issue is that Vanguard, as a synergy, doesn't do enough most of the time. It's okay against sharpshooters, but the armor really doesn't matter against hunters, and it does nothing when an assassin is jumping onto your backline. If anything, the additional armor hurts against Talon since he goes after the champion with the lowest armor. So yes, the champions are great for Vanguard, but not the synergy itself. It's time now for our last tier for today, C tier. This consists of Ninja, Warlord, Mage, Shade, Spirit, and Emperor. These synergies overall don't have much of an impact on the meta. They can certainly be useful, but are niche or rarely played. Yes, Ninja is in C tier. Even though it can be part of a strong composition, with Ninja Assassin, the problem is with its consistency. Poor Ninja is just far too difficult to really make work a lot of the time. Akali isn't as good as she used to be, and while a Chosen Zed can wreck face during the mid game, he's not going to scale as well late game against stuff like Ashe Hunter or Talon. And of course, Shen is heavily contested due to Adept, so even hitting 4 ninja can be difficult. Warlord is still in that odd spot that it's been in for a while. If you can high roll it in the mid game and transition into a bunch of 3-star champions with 9 warlords, it can be pretty good. But if you can't, it's hardly worth even using as a 3-piece synergy. That said, with the change to Xin Zhao, we may see some innovation when it comes to Warlord, but for now, it's definitely a C tier synergy. Mage is not a bad synergy, but it's definitely not doing well in a meta that doesn't cater to it at all. Sure, Nami Enlightened makes use of it, but it's not essential there, and the rare times that we see Ahri played, you're unlikely to ever see Mage played with her. There's just no right place for Mage beyond niche situations like Zillion with a Mage hat paired with a Lilia late game. Shade is in a similar position to Mage. It's definitely not a bad synergy, in fact it's really good, but the meta just isn't in a place that Shade can shine. Individually, Zed is great early on in the game and okay when played in Ninja Assassin, but he doesn't do well into the late game as he used to. Kayn, on the other hand, is back to being a solid late game champion, but he doesn't even make use of Shade in those situations. So that leaves Shade in an awkward spot where it's really strong, but really hard to play. Spirit, well, kinda sucks right now. Individually, the champions are decent, but the buff itself only matters when you have 4 Spirit with an Ahri. 2 Spirit, while commonly played, just doesn't provide enough. So until players either innovate with this synergy again or buffs come its way, we recommend skipping over Spirit for the most part. And the last synergy in C tier is Emperor. Okay, so Emperor is not bad. In fact, the Sandguards are pretty useful since they add extra health to your board. The problem is, it's just such a lame synergy for a 5-cost champion. Compare it to Tormented or the Boss and you'll see a huge disparity in what both of those traits give compared to Emperor. So yes, Azir is in a really good place and has a spot in the meta, but Emperor as a trait is just really underwhelming for a 5-cost champion. And that's all we have for today's tier list video. Even though there's a pretty decent amount of variety in what synergies you can play, it's pretty clear we're in a bit of a lull state for TFT. A lot of what was good last patch and the patch before it is still good now. Hopefully we see a shakeup in the meta in the coming patches. Let us know in the comment section below what synergies you think deserve to be higher or lower on our list. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.